The next BFCG IEI talk is going to be on October 20th when Dr. Carson Young will come to talk about good business, profits, and ethics at 6 p.m. in this room. So that's about 4 weeks from now. So if you want to come back for that, that'd be great. That's right after fall break. So that's the next one we're going to do together. Okay, with that, I think we'll go ahead and start. My name is Andy Gustafson, and I teach business ethics here. I've been here for 17 and a half years at Creighton. I love it here. And I also run the Business Faith and Common Good Institute, and we bring speakers to campus. Some of the students that are in my seminar group are here right now, and then we're going to meet with Dr. Emmett after. And that's what we do for our class. I'm really happy that we can partner with IEI. We've partnered on a few different projects in the past. They are the ones who did the bulk of the funding to help bring Dr. Ross Emmett here today. So I am grateful to them. Business Faith and Common Good is also helped by some outside sponsors. We've got Ray Anderson's got a couple of different things, Anderson Food Shops and a car wash. It's on the flyer if you want to look at it. And then Dundee Bank and F&M Bank also help fund this to make it possible to bring these people in here to talk with you. Ross Emmett is someone that I've only met a few months ago, virtually, and I got to pick him up yesterday, and I've been hanging around with him for about the last 24 hours quite a bit.
Talking his ear off.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So he's a fascinating person. He knows a lot about the history of economics. He was talking to me. I'm fascinated in Frank Knight from the Chicago School, and he knew all about Frank Knight's brothers and even some of his kids and what they ended up doing. And so I learned a lot of history that you don't usually get getting to talk to him. Ross comes to us from Arizona State University. He's a professor of economic thought and director of the Center of the Study of Economic Liberty. Professor Emmett's teaching deals primarily with the central questions of comparative economic governance. His research concerns both the history of how modern societies have answered those questions and how today's answers affect liberty, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Today he's going to talk about the entrepreneur in from an economic and theological perspective. So I was really excited to get him to come here, and I would like you to help me to welcome him tonight. Oh, I did forget to say, this is one of my favorite books. It's his book that he wrote about the Chicago School, and it's got a lot of the history of what we've been talking about the last 24 hours. So I love this book. If you want to borrow it, you can.
Having somebody else promote your book for you is a great thing. How many of you are business students? That's what I kind of figured. So this is the hook for you guys. Since the economist, you don't care about the economist angle, it's the business angle. So when I was your age, the biggest firm in the world was IBM. And I had an internship with IBM Germany in my international MBA. At that point in time, we held $1 billion in cash. I thought that was a lot of money. If you think it's a lot of money, it's time to go into small business administration. The big companies in the world are worth way, way more than $1 billion. We held it in cash. We were holding $1 billion in cash, turning it over every single day. Why? We had an inverted U-curve for the interest rates. The highest interest rates were at the shortest span of time. So investing overnight, for example, I made trades for like $60 million overnight. That was the best interest rate we could get. The more we could pack in to short-term interest rates, the better. Right? At the same time, I was working at IBM, the biggest company in the world. The biggest company in the world who was about to sell the farm. Because they didn't realize that with the introduction of what they created, the personal computer, that the value proposition was no longer the value proposition that IBM had previously built on. IBM built typewriters, computers, and copy machines, and rented them to customers, and made money from the rent on the machines. So when the personal computer was introduced, IBM thought of it as being like a copy machine. And so they wanted to sell you a computer and make money on the hardware. Is it the hardware of a computer which is valuable? Shake your heads. The value is in the software that drives the computer. Apple computer. Now they make fancy stuff, right? So but they make a lot of money off of the systems, right? And that's the interplay of IBM almost went bankrupt. In fact, the IBM that exists today is a totally different company than the IBM that I worked for, because they sold the value proposition. Don't you sell your value propositions. Hold on to them so you can make income on them. Now I'll talk about the topic of today. It's about entrepreneurship. First of all, let me start by thanking Andy and the Menard Family Institute for Economic Inquiry for this invitation to speak. I have to say that this is my first time in Omaha. I've actually seen Omaha from across Council Bluffs once, driving to Montana. But, being in Nebraska actually fulfills, for me, something important. I have now been in all 60 U.S. states and Canadian provinces that are contiguous. Not even Prince Edward Island, because Prince Edward Island is not attached to the mainland, and of course Hawaii and Alaska. So I've been everywhere else. I've been everywhere, man, to quote a song. And in the contiguous states and provinces of Canada. I'm also a dual citizen of Canada and the United States. But we're here to talk about entrepreneurship. Since its earliest uses in the 13th century, the term entrepreneur has identified a person who undertook a business enterprise, marshaling resources, accepting risk, and rewarded with profit or loss. Throughout the history of the use of the term, different authors have emphasized one or the other side of the marshaling resources and the accepting risk kind of arguments about what constitutes entrepreneurship. But please note the term proprietor, which signals ownership of a business, is not a substitute for the word entrepreneur, and has never been. I'll just do this.
Might not be on.
I got to turn it on. Yeah, that's the problem. The entrepreneur was largely ignored in economics for a long time because economists focused primarily on the operation of markets, their productive and distributive consequences for land, labor, and capital, and the economic role of the state. Much has been said about laborers and capitalists, even about innovation, but not entrepreneurs. For example, Google Ngram. Google's Ngram does go back before 1800, but there's not a lot of literature before 1800, and 1800 is, for this literature, is about the best date to start from. And I mean, there is some back in the 18th century, but it's not picked up here. Notice innovation, lots and lots and lots. I mean, this is lots of citations relative. As you can see, the percentages are really, really low, but that's out of the entire body of literature that is in Google's database. Right? So these are the fact that this is such a big difference here means that it's a significant difference, and that the word entrepreneur or entrepreneurship is of only sort of recent focus and usage. A new start was made in the 20th century, although here too the entrepreneur was largely ignored, at least by the economics discipline. Frank Knight focused on the entrepreneur's uncertainty bearing and the exercise of judgment more than judgment, not calculation. Max Weber's argument in the same time frame about the rising capitalist spirit underlay the dominant conception of the entrepreneur that survived past the 1920s into the 20th century economics, and that's Joseph Schumpeter's capitalist hero of creative destruction. Isn't that a great term? Right? Just put it in your head and keep it there. Creative destruction. What company do you know that has creatively destroyed an entire industry? You can come up with a slew of examples right away. Max Weber's argument, yeah, there, okay, that was it. Bill Baumol reminded those seeking to glorify the heroic entrepreneur of Schumpeter that the entrepreneur could just as easily seek to capture unique benefits for herself, either from the firm or from the public purse. Think defense contractors. Are defense contractors entrepreneurs or leeches? How do you think about them? Of course, the main focus in economics and other social sciences has remained the analysis of systemic interaction, its social consequences, and the role of the state. Social scientific methodology required outcomes that can be explained in non-individualistic terms. Even in economics, which does use individualistic explanations, the individual is usually understood to be responding to changing benefits and or costs, rather than initiating actions creatively. Go look at what Thorsten Veblen talked about the economic agent as being a little bit of gel stimulated by an electrical current. That's what he described the economic model to be. Israel Kurtzner's entrepreneurial alertness violates rational choice theory and has been relegated to what two Chicago economists called Austrian disquisitions on market process. The Austrians come in for a lot of fire in other parts, Austrian economists. That's a description of their economics, not a description of the country they come from. The ideas that they promote come from people who began their life in Austria. They ended up in America, and we've continued the word Austrian since, even though today most Austrian economists are born in America or elsewhere. Even when the entrepreneur is taken seriously, for example, in endogenous growth theory, the literature soon seeks to corral the entrepreneur, to suggest that various features of the market or of society correlate highly with entrepreneurship. In the business and psychological literature, a similar move happens as entrepreneurs become the product of particular traits or personal characteristics. The more the social and behavioral sciences explain, it seems, the less room there is for actual entrepreneurial action. As Peter Drucker once said, Peter Drucker was the foremost theorist of business schools for much of the second half of the 20th century. He said, every economist knows that the entrepreneur is important and has impact. But for economists, entrepreneurship is a meta-concept, something that profoundly influences and indeed shapes the economy without being part of it, so that economists can ignore entrepreneurs. Christian commentary on entrepreneurship follows a similar trajectory. Medieval scholasticism was as interested in issues of economics as it was in politics, and the teaching it provided in both situations was similar, focused on issues of moral choice and justice, both in terms of power and price. 19th century European liberals, like Jean-Baptiste Say and Frédéric Bastiat, celebrated markets and their incentives for individual action. Say, in fact, started his own spinning wheel employing about 500 women and children. Yes, child labor was as common in France as it was in England and elsewhere. The English and Scottish Enlightenment traditions saw the merger of classical political economy with a natural theology orthodoxy that create Christian political economy that underlay British conservative thought throughout the 18th and 19th century. I'm actually writing a paper that disagrees with that sentence. So I'm not entirely in agreement with that sentence right at the moment. I'm about to give a lecture in a couple weeks in Michigan on Christian socialism in the 19th century, in 19th century England, and I'm going to actually contradict with that statement, but that's okay. I left it in here because I had written it for this. In the United States, the combination of individualism, attention to personal responsibility, and political economy produced a similar defense of private property, free markets, a minimum of government intervention, which a friend of mine who unfortunately died a little bit early from cancer, Paul Hayne, who used to be a professor at the University of Washington, and he devoted his entire life to teaching first-year economics to students. That he went to the University of Washington and said, I am not a researcher, but I will be the best professor of economics you've ever had. And he educated thousands and thousands and thousands of students in economics as a first-year professor, and people flocked to his classes. He was phenomenal. And he wrote a textbook called The Economic Way of Thinking that's still in use today, although co-authored by two individuals who are from a university in the Washington area that we won't even mention because of its connection to certain professors here in the audience. This clerical laissez-faire lasted well into the progressive era. And so the point in listing all these is that in every Christian tradition, the entrepreneur is about as present as it is in the mainstream of economics. The word's mentioned, but when the real analysis begins, the entrepreneur as a person disappears, becoming a ghost in the machine. The main emphasis remains the importance of labor, the capitalist responsibilities to worker and society, the social benefits or costs of markets, and the responsibilities, limited or otherwise, of government. Throughout the early 20th century, commentary on economic affairs in all Christian traditions focused primarily on ethical evaluations of markets, some were for, some were against, and the valuable role of labor. The late 1970s and early 1980s did see a real change in the literature, both scholarly and Christian. The increase initially came from an interest in innovation. Just a little bit of a tick up right in here. Perhaps it was the fall of communism and the emergent pro-market political movements that assisted this, and perhaps a new wave of creative destruction that came out of computer technologies contributed. In any case, we can point to the influence of two books on the uptake of the literature of entrepreneurship. I've already mentioned one of them, Peter Drucker's book, Innovation and Entrepreneurship. For Drucker, the true entrepreneur is an innovator. The second book is Michael Novak's book, The Spirit of Democratic Capitalism, which initiated a Catholic, free market-oriented economic tradition. Prior to that, the Catholic tradition was most often represented by the Catholic worker movement and those kind of movements which emphasized the importance of labor and of supporting labor in society. In any case, we can point to the, I gave you the two books. Novak's book made a moral argument that Drucker, that's the computer for the room, it's not my computer. The Catholic, Novak's argument made a moral argument that Drucker wouldn't make. Novak's argument was that economic considerations were not just about assets, costs, and prices, but also about what human beings are. The Catholic tradition, and Protestant traditions as well, had lost sight of human creativity, something that democratic capitalism unleashed. Much of the spirit of democratic capitalism is an extended discussion of how the Catholic tradition misread capitalism because it focused on social justice for labor as opposed to seeing it as creativity, judgment, and the importance of the market test. As economics Nobel Edmund Phelps put it about 15 years ago, about 20 years from Novak's book, Phelps said, "Innovation makes scarce goods abundant. This quest to do better, to go farther, to extend our reach is part of what makes us human. If we place innovation at the center of economics, then we in effect make a sweeping assertion about human nature. For we claim at some level that humans are innovators." It's not emphasis that will sort of dominate everything I say for the rest of the time here. Before we can confront the theological tasks involved in developing a theology of entrepreneurship, we have to first confront the historical, or we might even say genealogical task, of considering our tradition's prior understandings of entrepreneurship and innovation. In many parts of the Christian tradition, these terms have been laden for centuries with both negative and positive connotations. If an innovation reinforced the existing order, it was good. If it occurred in a market, it was considered bad, deceitful, trickery. And hence it departed from the order ordained by God. Few, therefore, could provide an intellectual defense for the work of innovators and entrepreneurs. By the way, in the purges in Catholic and Protestant societies across Europe in the Reformation period and after, one of the groups of people who were burned at the stake, thrown into pits with snakes, dumped into water with heavy weights on them, etc., were people who were entrepreneurs, along with other people. Aren't you glad that your business school education doesn't end with being dumped into a lake with heavy weights around your ankles? At least I hope it doesn't end. Sorry, I throw these comments in. They're low cost, but they get laughs. So that's what I need. I need the feedback. So what are we to do if we want to think theologically about entrepreneurship and innovation? Well, first we have to start from our fundamental beliefs about God and human beings. Thus, we need to provide a framework for considering how our economic, social, and political organization contributes to or detracts from innovation and entrepreneurship. And we need to encourage reflection on human values, virtues, and capacities related to innovation and entrepreneurship that reflect a Christian anthropology. Not the anthropology we can watch on TV in other contexts. It's often easy to skip from the first to the third of those tasks, from theology to anthropology, psychology, and ethics. But the second task, theological reflection on what we might call the constitution of an entrepreneurial society, informed by a Christian anthropology, is perhaps the place where theological reflection may contribute its greatest potential impact. I generally find, except perhaps in this school, and maybe a few others, I generally find that this constitutional perspective is missing in the social science literature on innovation and entrepreneurial action. So what I propose to do is to use the rest of the time to outline a threefold theological framework for thinking about innovation and entrepreneurship. And my framework is going to have three interlocking triads. So at the end, I'll give you the whole interlocking triads, but I guess this is what I want. But for now, we'll get the first one. And you see some theological words, not economic words. So here's the first triad. Trinity, incarnation, Imago Dei. When God began to create the heavens and the earth, God saw everything he had made. It was supremely good. Genesis 1. It's always tempting to start a theological discussion of entrepreneurship and innovation with reference to Genesis 1. Because, well, God created the world. My God, the universe. I mean, like, this is the ultimate entrepreneurial action, right? Like, to call into being all that is being, right? No entrepreneur can do that. No human entrepreneur can do that, right? So, in the beginning, God created. Here's the supreme ex nihilo argument, like, out of nothing, something. Right? That's what every entrepreneur wants to do. It's outside the box, to use modern language. Right? But I actually want to start somewhere else. I want to start instead with the words that we speak each Sunday in the Divine Liturgy. Words from the Nicene Creed. You may have spoken these or heard these words many, many times. I believe in one God. I believe in one Lord. There's words in between. I believe in the Holy Spirit. I believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. The Nicene Creed is an affirmation of the totality of our faith in God Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, in the incarnation of Jesus, the Word, our Savior, and through whom all things were made, in the Holy Spirit, the giver of life, and in the Church, with its roots in the community of disciples, Christ gathered around him, and its reach to almost every community on earth today. The Creed puts the creation of heaven, earth, and life in the hands of the three persons of the Trinity, eternally in communion with each other. Accordingly, the Church owes its existence to Christ, and hence is God ordained and ruled rather than human created or the handmaiden of the state. Here we see the principle of subsidiarity in the Church's divine mission and also in God's generosity. Here we recognize our creative endeavors as sub-creations in the context of God's creation. A few additional comments may be needed regarding Christian anthropology. So, the biblical root is clear enough. God created humanity in God's own image. Theological interpretation of the Imago Dei tends to focus on the individual person's reflection of the image of God in human reason, creative freedom, morality, and spiritual nature. And of course, discussion of the Imago Dei is closely linked to the discussion of original sin. We are made in the divine image, but that image has been fractured and obscured by sin. But there's another theme that Christian anthropology draws upon. The complete quotation of Genesis 1, 37, so not ending at 31, but going on to verse 37, is this: God created humanity in God's own image. In the divine image, God created them, male and female. God created them. Note the plural. I emphasized it, so you probably caught it. The Imago Dei is reflected in each of us and in our life together. On earth as in heaven, we live, move, and exist, Acts 17:28 tells us, in community with God and other human beings. We're never entirely separate from them. Right? In family, in community, and in enterprise. Extended further in terms we can use to think about entrepreneurship, we can say that our institutions, markets, and associations form a context in which we live, move, and exist as entrepreneurs and those who work for them. Naturally, just as the Imago Dei reminds us of our individual fallen nature, so too it reminds us of the consequence of that fracture for our societies, markets, associations, and communities. If we only think of the Imago Dei as an individual in community, then we can approach the second task with a unique perspective But if we do think of the Imago Dei as an individual and community, the reflection of the triune God, then we can approach the second task with a unique perspective on the human person, always set in the context of a family, of a community, of a firm, and other associations. So we're led to our second task. Oh, there it is. Oh, yeah, okay. Second task. Rather than leaping from our foundational beliefs to a considerations of features of the individual entrepreneur, a more consistent approach in both theological and social scientific terms would be to consider other concepts which enrich our understanding of entrepreneurship and innovation as social phenomena. In both the Catholic and the Protestant traditions, we see a tension between an individualistic view and of economic participation, one that defines us solely in terms of our preferences, our resources, and our property rights. And the Imago Dei, which sees us as persons in community, and hence requires us to consider also our family, our social associations, our church, and a network of responsibilities and ties that inform our actions. So now, the truly, probably newest information for many of you in this lecture will be in the next couple paragraphs. An illustration of this point is provided by a social entrepreneur and consultant that I had the fortune to meet a number of years ago when I was working with entrepreneurs in mid-Michigan and thinking about how to help them. We met this consultant, Ernesto Ciroli, and as he was talking, he said, I ask new entrepreneurs three questions. I ask the entrepreneur, which of the following areas is your strength? Product development, marketing, or finance? Think for yourself. If you were starting to think about starting a firm, which of those three would be your strength? And then Ciroli says to the person, because it's usually a single person who comes to him and says, I want to start, business. So Ciroli says, there's these three tasks. And he says, who are the two other people you're going to bring on board to provide strengths in the two areas that you see yourself as being weaker in? The entrepreneur cannot act alone. The entrepreneur is in community, works with other people. Ciroli argues that these two questions are even more important than your decision about what product or service you provide. It's not, oh, we're going to provide X. It's, okay, who are we going to work with? Let's figure out what we're going to do. In other words, from the start, your entrepreneurial venture should be built upon a community of persons united in purpose, an entrepreneur in community. Ciroli's point emphasizes a central argument that Frank Knight, asks, and your professors will know that there's never a lecture I give that doesn't include reference to Frank Knight, because he's the person I've done most of my work on. Frank Knight's theory of entrepreneurship that's been overlooked. For Frank Knight, the greatest uncertainty an entrepreneur has to bear is the consequence of having to trust other people with their business. So you have to function with other people. You can't avoid functioning with other people. But it's also the greatest danger, the greatest threat that the entrepreneur feels is that I have to trust somebody else. I have to trust another human being. The entrepreneur cannot act alone. Not simply because there's too much to do, but also because we need other people to enrich our understanding of the undertaking. We need others, and to deny that is to deny our creation in the image of God. Let me just go back here for a second. No, I'm going to change. Okay. Christian social theologies discuss the relation of the individual and the family to the state, and also the role of intermediary associations. In the Catholic tradition, these reflections are often grouped under the theme called subsidiarity. Pope Pius XI, in Quadragesimo Anno, said, "It's a fundamental principle of social philosophy, fixed and unchangeable, that one should not withdraw from individuals and commit to the community that which individuals can accomplish by their own enterprise and industry. By extension, what individuals can do in consort, working together in a business or another form of social organization, should not be withdrawn and committed to another organization, centralized function, if the decentralized association can accomplish the task by their enterprise and industry." Today, the notion of subsidiarity is usually thought of. Have you heard that term, subsidiarity? Okay, I'm speaking to a Catholic audience. Like, no Protestant has ever heard this, and nobody outside of Christianity has ever heard the term before. There are some, the Reformed tradition has the use of the word subsidiarity too, but, so, you know, I knew I could at least get a few people in the audience who would know, would have some sense of this idea. Right. Today, the notion of subsidiarity is usually thought of in political terms. In fact, the EU enshrines subsidiarity as its essential definition of the relationship of Europe to itself. And they designed it completely upside down and totally backwards and made it centralization by the top and control of the bottom. So they just totally screwed it. I almost said a different word. I would apologize to some of the audience if I'd said it. Today, the notion of subsidiarity, but the concept's important to our understanding of entrepreneurship. Many are quick to argue that either, you may have heard this about entrepreneurs, you didn't really do that. You hear this, Makazadi's book, I've forgotten the title of it, The Entrepreneurial State. Makazadi's book says, Steve Jobs didn't really do that. The government of the United States did. Why the heck didn't the government then, like, make billions of dollars off of it? We could have zero debt. They didn't think it was valuable. They've created this thing called what we call the internet, the ability to wirelessly transmit information between two stations. They put one machine back there, they put one here, they transmitted information from this machine to that machine wirelessly. They were like, cool. That was the Department of Defense. Department of Defense goes, cool. But in a war situation, there'd be too much going on and there'd be too much static, so this is kind of worthless. So it sat on the shelves for about 15 years. And then somebody came along and said, well, let's sell it to somebody. That's the internet. That's the fundamental backbone of the creation of the internet, is that was done by the US government, but never, they'd had no idea what to do with it. So this perspective leads to a market failure theory of innovation, which suggests, the other side of this that's market failure is this, and you get this quite a bit. If the market was really successful, the entrepreneur would capture most of the benefits of that good being created. So if the argument is, if you create something, then you should get most of the return from it. Like, it should go to you as the entrepreneur, as the person who's created this. And it turns out from work that the Nobel laureate William Nordhaus has done, he's done several like really cool projects. It comes about that entrepreneurs actually get a return that's at best like 20% of the value of what they create. So there's this argument that what we really need to do is give all entrepreneurship to the state because then the state could actually capture it. It's like you missed the point. The entrepreneur actually benefits by getting stuff out there, and all of us benefit from that maximally, and the state gets revenue, and the entrepreneur makes some money, and you know, we can say Elon Musk makes a lot of money. Think it through. A theology of subsidiarity would help us understand the significant but limited role that the state can play in ensuring that entrepreneurial action is encouraged by individual liberty, protected by private property, assisted by community action that creates an environment for creative activity, and judged not by the goals of public policy, but by the market test. What's the market test? I've used that term twice. Do you ever use it? I'll let you think about it. What's the market test? A Christian understanding of the social and political economy of human flourishing does not only depend upon the individual, community, and subsidiarity. It also requires the freedom and moral agency to make wise, informed choices in the pursuit of an entrepreneurial calling. Without liberty of action, the entrepreneur, as a moral agent, can't make decisions, not only for their own entrepreneurial vision, but also its values and purposes of a shared community. Liberty of action, as well as subsidiarity, require the institutional support of a free society, the rule of law, private property, a market economy, and constitutional democracy. Guidance for how they use the liberty provided by that set of institutions is a third task of a theology of entrepreneurship and innovation. And that's the one I have on the screen now. The third task of a Christian theology focuses on the human values, the virtues, and the qualities behind entrepreneurial action. Along with the standard arguments about risk-taking and entrepreneurial alertness, right? We could add consideration of the Christian virtues one can draw upon as an entrepreneur. For example, prudence. Prudence is a word that sounds prudish. It literally means thinking about what you do and seeing if it's worth doing. That's basically all it means. But, you know, every night I sit down, turn on the voice, and am I actually taking responsibility for my actions? Behind this orientation is the fundamental fact that success as an entrepreneur is defined by the market test. Now I'm going to define it. Does the entrepreneur create something which others will see as contributing to their life? And is there sufficient demand to enable the entrepreneur to cover the costs of production and make a reasonable return? That's the market test. Both sides. Do other people think this is important to their lives? And do enough other people think that's important enough that you can get a return that makes it significant enough for you to continue doing what you're doing? When entrepreneurial improvements pass the market test, we can say that on balance, they contribute to human betterment. Creativity is on there. Yeah. So it's acknowledged in both secular and Christian literature. The Christian understanding of creativity is usually found in the arts. Viewed from that perspective, creativity and innovation are usually discussed in Schumpeterian terms, like new products that transform fundamentally the world we live in, right? Artistic enterprises, etc. A good task for a joint theological and economic research program or project would be the study of the relation between creativity and costs, especially transaction costs, reduction. So creativity and cost reduction, which are key features of entrepreneurship today. Transaction cost reducing innovations are also important because they require a design element. that begins from the perspective of the user, not the producer, but the user, which takes us to the second aspect of this task. So we're nearing the end. When Adam Smith says, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest," he could have just as easily said that the butcher, the brewer, and the baker should not expect consumers to pay them so they can pursue whatever their interests are, but rather because consumers take regard for their consumers' interests, right? So Adam Smith is really good at only giving you one half of a two-sided statement. This is one of the most fundamental ones, because this statement is usually read as saying that Adam Smith believes that producers are selfish, because it doesn't say anything about the other side. But of course, he wrote a book on rhetoric, and it was a good seller. And that book on rhetoric often uses only half of a reference, because he's expecting you to be able to figure out the other half. So yes, the butcher, the baker, and the brewer are looking out for their interests when they sell you something. But I, as a consumer, are looking out for my benefit when I go to their stall and think about buying something from them, and I choose to buy from them. I'm doing the same thing. I don't language use. I teach in a public university. I can say whatever. So, you know, I don't care anything about this person selling me the good. I just want to get my stuff, right? Like, I'm not looking out for your welfare. I'm trying to buy what I need. Just as the person selling to me, they're not fundamentally invested in my welfare. They're fundamentally invested in their welfare. But you put the two of those together, and it tempers both sides. Because I discover that there are people who want what I have, and I can figure out a way to sell that to them. And there are people like you who then are on the other side are like, oh, I have a new option. I need to put this into my menu options, and let me see if I can do this. And that's what markets do. It's not self-interest versus self-interest. It becomes a mutuality of each of us exploring what is in our interest, but it's not a selfish, it's not just, I will only do what's good for me. I don't really care about you. It's true. But by the market, I have to care about you because the price is going to reflect your concern and my concern. Fortunately, I don't have to learn about you in order to do business with you. Theological reflection on charity, generosity, and market-tested improvements can provide a needed corrective to the anti-market social theology that's also present in some management literature, by the way, management school. It has a great deal of anti-market ideas. And that they elevate firm culture above market success, encouraging a focus on the self without attention to the interests of others. I should say it goes beyond business schools. I have two daughters who work for one of the major consulting firms, and it's just incredible what the language of the firm is all. It has nothing to do with market realities. It's just all about me. There's no consideration for the other side of the transaction. So you can ask me about it in conversation. So what I've tried to do here is encourage us to think both. I did say a few things about judgment, but we can let that go. Here's the whole thing. Is encourage us to think both economically and theologically. about entrepreneurship. If we start from the notion that economic action is merely the allocation of resources to competing demands, and that all economic motives reduce to mere self-interest, and entrepreneurial action is only something that a certain class of people do, we end up with an economics that puts entrepreneurship and innovation outside the box. They're not going to explain it. A social theology which sees no reason to treat entrepreneurship and innovation as issues worthy of theological reflection. So, for us, the economist and the theologian who reject this anti-market, anti-theology rhetoric can approach this topic with a field ripe for entrepreneurial thinking. Questions? Thoughts? Professors thrive on applause, so, you know, it counts for, you know, several $1,000s worth of income a year. Oh, do I need to?
No, you're fine.
I'm fine?
You're fine.
You'll make adjustments?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to be closer to the audience during Q&A. So what thoughts, questions, responses, ideas? I taxed you pretty hard. I'm assuming that for some of you this was an easy listen, but for others, either the economic stuff or the theology stuff might have been a little bit like, whoa, where are we going here? But I'm happy to answer questions and think with you.
I'd like student questions first. I'm sure there's professor questions, but it's up to you first.
How many of you have thought seriously about wanting to be an entrepreneur? Anybody? How many of you want to work for a company that makes a profit? Let me add, making a profit. Some of you might want to work for companies that don't make a profit. Anybody here want to work for a company that does not make a profit?
Federal government?
You were going to say?
Yeah, I will work for a nonprofit.
So a nonprofit is an interesting proposition because what the nonprofit does is generate at the end of the day a zero balance between revenues received and costs expended. But in part they do that, if they get extra money, what they do is they put it in their capital accounts, and profit and loss statements are flow accounts. Right? Profit is not a fixed stock, it's the extra flow above your costs. So you're banking money, so that's a good thing. But that may enable you to do more things. But how do you know? So, I mean, here's the question for the nonprofit association in this kind of question. How do you know that you're actually having a successful impact on people's lives? Yeah.
Your donors like it, they keep giving you money.
Market test.
We've got a skeptical economist over here, so I'm going to shut him up. You didn't even hear what he said. How does a nonprofit understand success? Yeah.
Provide some like good to society, some like public good or something, and maybe measure.
Okay, how do they know that the cost at which they're providing, so he said they provide some good for people, like they're helping people, right? I mean, like they're providing something that helps people, okay? How do you, I'm not gonna put you on the spot, so don't worry. How does a nonprofit know that it's actually contributing the most good to the people it's benefiting, or that it's contributing to the right people if it always has a zero balance at the end of every year?
other measurements that they,
Yeah,
metrics that they look at.
right.
So it's not-
Like whether people say in a survey that they benefited. How many of you fill out survey data? When people ask you for survey, do you tell the truth? Somebody said no. I'm not even gonna suspect where to look, okay? What?
A version?
A version of the truth? What, 50% degree of variance? So I love nonprofit. Well, I've worked for universities my entire life, and I've worked for other organizations entirely nonprofit. I've only worked once for a profit-making firm, or a firm that's going to live or die on its profitability. So yes, I love that world too. At the same time, I was in a college that was going to fail. And I made the decision to leave. And I told all of my fellow faculty members in that school that they had 3 years. And that if the financial situation of the college didn't turn around in 3 years, it was going to die. And I left in the second year, and at the end of the second year, the provincial government bailed out, there's a Canadian school, the provincial government bailed out the school and absorbed it into one of the state universities. And now, 25 years later, that school is about to be closed down by the provincial university. And all of my friends that I taught with spent 20 years teaching at an institution that never was able to cover its costs and was basically having the state fund it. And I moved on to other state-funded universities, but who were in a different fiscal environment. Canadian universities, nobody donates to Canadian universities, so it's very hard to have donations to a university in Canada. In the United States, we have lots and lots of money that gets donated to centers at the university and the programs, so that happens. Any other questions? Yeah.
Why aren't you an entrepreneur?
Good question. I would say that there are ways in which I am, but I would also say that I am incredibly fiscally adverse to loss of income. And so I could probably have done better if I had made certain choices, better in the terms of fiscal status. On the other hand, I don't know, have I done a decent job academically? Like, am I viewed as a successful academic? I'm getting a thumbs up over here. I mean, you guys invited me here, so there's got to be some sense in which I'm a positive contribution. And frankly, that kind of contribution is something that I don't have any idea how to monetize. So, for example, I regularly receive, well, now Facebook posts, or LinkedIn commentary from students I taught 30 to 40 years ago, who say, you know, looking back at my career, the most important thing I ever did was take your courses. So I view that as a reward, even though it doesn't feed my wife and I. But it is a positive return. Right? And I'm being serious about this. I received a phone call one evening, and I'm like, hello, hello. And this was, I just had a cell phone for like the first time. This is a long time ago, okay? So, and these two guys said, is this Ross's phone? And I was like, yeah, it's Ross's phone. They were like, oh, well this is, and he told me who he was, and he said, I'm here at the bar. We're in Berlin. And we were walking, each of us was walking down the street. We're here, both of us are here on business, but we didn't know the other one was here. And we're walking down the street, and all of a sudden we bump into each other, and we're like, dude, like, how you doing? And they both had studied with me at the very first school I ever taught at in British Columbia. And they were both on business in Berlin. They went to a bar. I mean, in Berlin, where do you go other than a bar? And they were drinking some beer, and so they were toasting me, and they were saying, like, you know, the best professor we ever had was Professor. And so they were like, well, let's call him. So they called me from the bar in Berlin, and they said, we just want to thank you. You had more impact on our lives than anyone else, you know, other than our parents. And we just wanted to say thanks. Like, that's an incredible reward. And I get that, actually, frankly, quite a lot from students that I've taught over time. Those are the kinds of rewards that, for me, are important. I grew up in a family of teachers, so they taught high school. I was like, oh God, no, never. But I have the same kind of, you know, at my father's funeral this couple months ago, there were over 300 people present at his funeral. He hadn't taught in the school that I grew up going to school in, that he had taught in. Most of the people who were at that funeral hadn't seen him in 30 years, and there were over 300 people at the funeral, and it was just and there were more online because we had it on Zoom too, and those are the kinds of rewards that a teacher really finds meaningful. And yeah, I could make more money. Some of the friends I graduated with from my international MBA program, they have a lot more money than I do, and I keep trying to hit them up to fund my center. But I've had some really good conversations with some of them recently about what they've done with their lives and what their careers have done, and the kinds of companies they worked for, and when they retired, and what they're doing in their retirement and things like that. They all ask me, when are you going to retire? And I'm like, what am I going to do if I retire? What I won't do when I retire is teach, but I'm going to be writing and 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 writing. So that's a decent retirement, but I still need more money to do that. So. How you notice, economists don't require you to earn a benefit in monetary terms alone. That's a business school thinking. Sorry. For the economist, there are other forms of return as well. And that's important to realize. Just like there are other forms of cost. Not everything that you have to expend to undertake an activity is in monetary terms. You might be able to turn it into a monetary term, but it's not all monetary in character. Lost, you know, the economist will say, a lost opportunity. So this coming summer, or this past summer, how many of you chose not to do something this past summer in favor of doing something else? Every single one of you. Was it worth it? Like, did it actually turn out to be more beneficial than the thing you didn't do? Almost every single one of you says that. That's good. I mean, at least your perceptions right now say that. That's great. That's great. Okay. We all have experiences in life, though, where it's like, I shouldn't have done that last night. That was not a good outcome. I won't say whatever those things are. And that's that. I mean, that we are humans and we have regrets. I certainly have regrets. Notice how quickly I can go from entrepreneurship to personal advice on dating and life and drinking and, oh, did I say those things? So, any other quick comments, questions? Okay, the profs can ask questions now. ask me to get out something you wanted to.
Yeah, the only question I have is how the market has put you in relationship to others. You said something that said, and I don't have to know anything about the other person, which I think is, for me, resonating with, like Adam Smith's,
Yeah.
claim about how markets work. I wonder if I could push you on that, because it's not that relationships don't help, right? There's gotta be something there, right? So my default is to go back to Aristotle's different levels, right? So we can get by on utility,
Right.
but that may not be sufficient to do all things. And so I wonder if I could push you. a
I'm
little
probably
bit.
less Aristotelian than you are. That's a simple answer. But at the same time, I think you are right. And I think that all of us, in almost every decision we make, have elements of those things, either a bonus of pleasure, and I don't mean pleasure, but of something that's good for us, and or too much regret or too much of a cost, right? So I mean, I agree with that, and it can be either way, but.
But there's a reason
They-
to go back
the-
to the same bar all the time.
Yeah, and no, I agree. And I think the Smithian argument would be that we end up coming to think that a certain setting or a certain interaction, kind of interaction or something like that, will have the best benefit for us. You know, that it has the highest probability of increasing our utility, if I want to put it in those terms. And it might not be true. But at the same time, I come to expect that it will be. Hence, I go back to the same bar every Friday night, or, I always cheer, I don't, by the way. I always cheer for the Detroit Lions. I have never cheered for the Detroit Lions, ever. No. Is there anybody who cheers for the Detroit Lions? No, I have friends who cheer for the Detroit Lions. But I don't know if that in any way answers your question.
Yeah, I worry that sometimes people justify this cost and benefit analysis to separate themselves out, right? So then trying to pin down what provides the community the context and the relationships is really difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree that it's really difficult. I still don't have a language other than cost and benefit to think about it in, other than some, like you said, an Aristotelian ranking of the good going up. So maybe, so I'm not a person who says that, this is no different than that, when it's like, this is clearly a better good than this one. The problem with that statement is that if that's true, I should right now go exit the door, start driving towards Michigan, because as of 2 days from now, my wife's going to start driving this direction from Michigan, and we're heading to Arizona. She's going to head to Arizona. I'm flying back to Arizona. She's in Michigan. She's been in Michigan since the beginning of the summer. And so the best thing for me to do is to get to her as fast as possible, no matter what the cost is. So that's the kind of the trade-off, right? It's like, yes, our relationship is super, super, super important. Unfortunately, I'm a professor in Arizona State University, and the daughter who's having a baby is located in Pittsburgh, and the other daughters who are going to be at the bridal shower are located in Michigan, and more people, parts of the family, were going to be there, and so I exited because it was, unfortunately the case that I could not be part of that as the grandfather. But if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be here, because it happened just this past weekend, and I'm a professor, and I can't just not show up for a month or two. So, and this is one of the difficulties with economists and ethics. There's like the good. Does the good supersede everything? Because there are little things that matter a whole lot and might either increase your good or cost you significantly. It's very important for us to have that money from Arizona State in the long run so that we can eventually not be doing this all the time. Realities. Any other thoughts, questions?
We should probably wrap up, we're a
I
little bit
can-
over, so
Yeah,
thank you so
cool.
much.
I especially want to thank you all for being willing to interact. Even the people who didn't speak were, you weren't just sitting there. So I could see smiles, I could see laughter, I could see people thinking. That's what professors thrive on. So thank you very much for inviting me and for you guys being here. I know you had to be here, but still, thanks for being here.